Welcome back. I'm John White, and with me today is Master Gardener Valois Pierce, and Valois is one of the Doñana County Master Gardeners. So, Valois, what do you got for us?
Well, John, we have a hollow stem of a Texas Honey Mesquite.
All right. Um, if the folks on the viewing here can see the little holes here that are in the twig here, this is called a mesquite twig borer, and the borer is an insect of a lot of our native mesquites, and as we start using some native plant material in our landscapes, we are probably going to see some of these insects show up. A lot of times just clipping the tips where they have hollowed into it. Insecticide sprays can be used, but they aren't necessarily that effective because it's hard to tell exactly when they're gonna hit. Usually they're more of a seasonal problem, and they may not be an annual type problem. So clipping the tips off, if we break this open, there is a little borer right in there. We can kind of see them as you look down the stem. So again, kind of keeping the tips clipped off of that is probably the best thing. If you have property that adjoins a native area where you have a lot of native mesquites, those insects can come off those native mesquites, especially in a dry year like this year, and go to your landscape because you're keeping it more irrigated in a landscape. Lois, what do we have here?
Well, this Japanese maple's been doing very well for a number of years, and all of a sudden it's just looking poorly. It has scale on the stem and the leaves are drying out. I've been giving it plenty of water, and I'm very concerned about it.
Okay, Japanese maple, as far as the southern part of the state, is hard to grow here. You're lucky that it's done as well as it has. The high heat and the lack of humidity, sometimes the salts in our soil, create a lot of problems. Japanese maples do better if you're going to try and grow one, would be as an understory plant, so it has to have lots of shade. So you would grow it underneath a larger tree so that it's getting a lot of shade. If there's some way you could build up the humidity, it would help it also, but Japanese maple is just very hard. They're a challenge to grow in the southern part of the state. So, if you like challenges, then that's a good one to grow, but it is difficult to keep it looking good.
Thank you. John, I've got an example of a magnolia that has crispy brown and yellow leaves and mottled, and I'm just wondering if there's anything that we're going to be able to do to help this plant out.
Okay, on the magnolias, again, the southern New Mexico climate's probably not the greatest for magnolias. They do like to be in somewhat of a protected area because of our high winds. We have alkaline soils. They grow in areas where they get a lot more moisture. The soil's a little more acidic and a little bit more organic. So it's really in a tough situation here. One of the things just looking at this is the leaves are quite small. So the tree looks like it's under some kind of maybe a nutrient stress.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be one thing I'd look at. It is an evergreen, so it will lose older leaves as it puts on newer leaves. These, even though they're small, are probably really some of the older leaves. And the tree right now is just putting new growth on. So, but again, just the overall size of these look very small, and you're getting a little bit of chlorosis, a little bit of micronutrient deficiency starting to show up in it. So I would probably try and fertilize this tree with a micronutrient type fertilizer. Look at the overall fertilization program. It may need a little bit of nitrogen just to kind of help put some growth back on it. Make sure it's watered well out beyond the trunk of the tree so that it's getting adequate moisture, and see what kind of growth we can get back on it. But the tree does look very deficient and weak, so that'd be my recommendation.
Is it possible to start a new tree from these little bud grafts right here?
Okay, as far as starting a magnolia, they're pretty hard to start as far as a stem cutting, and they can be started that way, but it takes a special situation with equipment and everything to set up to do that, but it can be done. and it can be taken as a hardwood cutting.
This sample was brought in not as a problem for a change, but the individual thought it was a Russian olive, but not any Russian olive they've ever seen.
Well, Valois, that's because it's a European olive and not a Russian olive. And in the southern part of the state, European olives are kind of cold tender. So a real cold winter, you could possibly have some damage on it. So if you did grow a European olive, you wouldn't want it in a real permanent location because of the chance of freeze damage. So you brought in some pretty good samples here, Valois.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you very much for being on the show, and we'll be back in just a moment.